Welcome everyone to an amazing session that we got someone who's been with us since day one, really helped us and supported the Black Blockchain Summit since 2018, has definitely been someone who's been a trailblazer in our space that we're thankful. He's actually helped me out in some tough binds when I needed some real material in my first speaking engagement in Zimbabwe. I definitely appreciate him allowing me to lift some of his 22, I think it was Money 2020, 2014 presentation, and I used it in Zimbabwe. So I just want to say thank you, Cameron Winklevoss. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Humbly. Well, I just want to kind of catch up. You know, we've done this before, and this year you've been able to come back and, you know, been going through the COVID. There's been a lot of things going on, and we've seen some cycles. We've seen many cycles. I mean, we've seen altcoins, ICOs, and we got a lot of things going on. We have things going on with ETH, and, you know, I think it's NFTs, so much going on. You know, catch us up. What's been going on? What's the latest and greatest with Gemini? We appreciate you know, building a product that actually allows us to, as a community, to know we have pillars that stand for, you know, again, good uses, regulatory compliance, and all the things that we need as an example of what our standards are in our community. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think, so one of the products that we've recently launched that we're really excited about is the Gemini credit card. And so by swiping, you can actually earn crypto back up to 2 to 3% back. So you can earn Bitcoin every time you swipe the card. And it's really a great way to stack sats. I think one of the biggest questions people have is like, how do I time when I get into crypto? And this sort of takes the timing out of the thought process, because you're always sort of accumulating crypto as you go about your daily uses of credit cards and whatnot. And so we think it's sort of an easy access point into the space and takes away some of those questions around like, how do I time? How do I get in? We all know it's kind of impossible to time unless you're a professional, and even then, you know, you need a crystal ball. So we think it's going to be a great way to onboard the next wave of people into the space. So we're really excited about that. So instead of earning flimsy airline miles or points or whatever, you can actually earn Bitcoin or any of the cryptos that we support. So we're really excited about that. And obviously we're in a bit of a winter right now, but that's actually kind of the best time to stack and start investing, because
exactly
there's all that potential upside. I think people, they get disheartened a little bit, and that naturally happens, of course, if you rode the last wave up or you bought towards the last peak. But I think it's actually the best opportunity, and people in the community who have seen this before. I mean, you've lived through how many cycles? Like you've seen this movie, you know how it's going to play out. So now is actually the most critical time of getting people in and really just making sure it's easy for them.
Yeah, I think you make a sound point about that next, you know, billion. I mean, we got so many people who want to expose this, how to get them into it. And, you know, I remember, you know, local Bitcoin, you know, you can literally go and just meet somebody and actually get access to it. You know, we've seen the ATMs, but I think, again, with all those friction points, being able to use a credit card, something that people are already familiar with, and then being able to allow them to acquire stack sats. Like we really, I think, again, I'm not imposing my maximalist views, and I'm open to everything. I'm just saying, just going through all this and seeing all the shenanigans, I'm just kind of like zeroed in. But what you're saying, that stacking Satoshis, a Satoshi will always be a Satoshi. I don't care. It's always a Satoshi. Yeah. So giving them a credit card to get access to that, and not going through, you know, cold wallets and all those things that we're looking at in the past. What do you see then, as we're looking at this opportunity, as some of the things that, you know, beyond just, you know, getting people to be aware and understand the use cases, once they get their sats, what are some of the things that you see or envision going forward in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you don't have to be a maxi per se to believe that Bitcoin's the right starting point for most people, because the thesis is so sort of obvious, and it's been hiding in plain sight for since inception, right? Like gold 2.0, it's hard money, fixed supply. It's truly fixed. It's the only commodity in the universe that's actually, or I'd say the observable universe, that's actually fixed. It doesn't, the supply does not expand with demand. And people look at gold and they say, oh, it's precious and it's scarce, but it's not actually fixed. And as that price goes up, the demand, expands the supply because it becomes more profitable to mine for gold in more other places. Same for oil. As the price of oil goes up, you just develop innovation and better drilling technology to the point of where you get fracking in the US. It was thought to be that there was peak oil production in the US, and then fracking came along, and then the US is a net exporter, or could be, but we made some decisions to say, we're going to limit the drilling in our backyard and buy oil from other people instead. But if we could totally be a net exporter in oil, and that's just a function of demand increasing, and price. The Bitcoin supply will not change, and that, I think, once people wrap their head around that, the light bulb goes on and they say, oh, I get it, this is gold, but it's better because it's more divisible, more portable. It can go anywhere in the world, and I can store it on a ledger, a Trezor, a hardware wallet, or with a seed phrase. So I think that's like it's the easiest to sort of understand and analogize in terms of getting into crypto. So I usually encourage people to start there, and whether that's getting signing up to an exchange like Gemini and buying as little as $5 worth, which you can. I think most people also, they think you have to buy an entire. It's like, oh, but I can't afford $22,000 Bitcoin. It's like, that's okay. You can buy $5, $10, and just start like educating yourself and learning. And then I think the next logical step, of course, is Ethereum, right? This decentralized, massive global computer. And so I think those are the, Bitcoin's the OG. It gave us this blueprint of like, how do you decentralize the world? It's money that works, it's purpose built for the internet, moves like email. At the end of the day, money is just information, right? An entry on a ledger. So why doesn't it work like all the other information that we interact with? And it should, and it can, and Bitcoin sort of proved that. So if you stream, music, we stream movies, now we stream money in that sort of sense. And I think what the funny thing about Bitcoin is like, it actually doesn't have to really do anything beyond just storing value and being fixed in supply. And so when we look at like places around the world where like they don't have like sound money, and you actually don't have to look too far, you can look in your backyard, the US government, right? It's historically been pretty well managed, like on a relative basis. However, we're seeing near 10% inflation because of the printing and all this stuff that happened over the past decade, that started in the financial crisis in 2008, which was the backdrop of when Bitcoin was created, and has continued. And the real shame of it is, if you don't have your value in assets that can reprice, then you are losing 10% a year, and you may not be able to keep up with the cost of goods, which is not good. And I think, we all we're seeing this money supply. I think it quadrupled in the past decade. It might be off a little bit on the magnitude, somewhere in that. You just look at the Fed graphs, and it's kind of insane. And I think so. We were right about inflation. We were right about that loose money is going to create these problems. Bitcoin hasn't reacted in the way we thought necessarily at this point in time, but I think it's important to remind ourselves that it's an emergent store of value, and it's going to move around and be more volatile because it just hasn't matured yet. We don't have hundreds of millions of people into it. It's new, it's growing, it's fledgling, and when the sort of there's all these things going on around us, people pull back, and if they perceive Bitcoin as being new and sort of a risk on asset, they'll pull back. But I think the long-term thesis is still true, because we've seen, gold's been around for thousands of years, and it's got that head start. But Bitcoin, our belief is it's better than gold. It's gold, but does things better than gold itself. And so I think it's just a matter of time. Like, the long-term thesis is the same. It will continue to play out. So it's really, I think first and foremost, it's a store of value. There are programmable natures of Bitcoin, and we'll sort of see where that goes. But obviously, like, Ethereum has more of that built in. And the purpose of Ethereum is more around smart contracts and programmability. So I'm not sure that Bitcoin actually has to do a whole lot more than getting more people in at this point.
How about the layers? Are you into? I mean, again, we did a transaction from Nigeria to Zimbabwe, a remittance transaction. This is back in 2018, where we use a Lightning node. We have, like, Raspberry Pi in Zim and one in Nigeria, and actually we paid out through a bank in Zimbabwe. And I think, again, Satoshi did, as much that could be expected. And now it's for us to build on top of that foundation. I think you spoke to it, like, again, that level one, super secure, we consistent, and then we can kind of like get a little cuckoo bird on. No, we can go in and experiment on top of that. Are those things that are part of what Gemini, or what the work you've been a part of, points in that direction, or do you look at it in a different way?
I think it's super critical to get as many people around the planet access to Bitcoin and a store of value, right? It's like the ultimate check and balance to bad behavior, bad monetary policy. And so I think that gold has sort of, it predates all of this, right? And I think having that ability, that fixed supply, that hard money option, if things get bad or you're not liking what you're seeing, and there's been rampant mismanagement, or just mismanagement at 10% a year, right? But obviously there's been governments where the mismanagement is significantly worse. I think it's critical for like empowering individuals to, like, protect their wealth, to get as many people into Bitcoin as possible. Like, I often say it's not just like a technology, it's a movement, it's a way of thinking. It's about being like a sovereign, independent individual, banking yourself. Those are super critical so that you're not tied to one system, because unfortunately, like, systems get abused, right? And there's an access problem, and there's always like a central person in control, and they can just say, hey, I don't want you in the system or whatever. And so I think it's super important to always have that exit strategy or that alternative, like a Bitcoin. But I think Bitcoin, so getting people into crypto is a huge part of our mission. But we also have, like, an opportunity fund where we support core developers, because it's super important to also make sure that Bitcoin continues to improve and stay secure. All this is sort of for naught if, like, Bitcoin doesn't work and Ethereum isn't, if these don't play out. So we think it's important to give back and support the core developers. And there's not a ton of them. It's a small community, and they're sort of all over the world and super passionate. But it's hard to make a living working just on a protocol unless there's support and grants and whatnot. So we definitely try and play our part in that. And I think that's been around for the past 2 years or so. And we've given at least, I think, $2 million in grants away to support the underlying protocol, because we're all nothing and we wouldn't be here without Bitcoin. So that's sort of job zero, is making sure that Bitcoin thrives and is secure.
There's a couple. I wanted you kind of brought up some things, and I just to help clear it up. You did bring up oil, and you brought up energy, and I'm not going to call them haters. Those are my words. So I'm not trying to put it on you, but there's folks who'll come up with this crazy thing about how we're using up all the energy in the world. and they're literally writing these terrible things on paper that cut trees down, that literally uses ink. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're going to tell me sending a letter in using the snail mail is somehow better than using email? I mean, how can you tell me minting nickels and dimes is better for the environment than me using Bitcoin? Have you? What's your I just wanted to give you just a little piece on the energy count because it comes up, and I'm like, contextually, this doesn't seem like we're draining all the energy. We're getting the most efficient energy, but I just
Yeah, no, you said it well. Contextually, the conversations lack context. I mean, people look at the Bitcoin network and the energy usage, and because it's so open and transparent, you can actually see what the network uses, which is a blessing, but also
here.
people take that and then they say they put it up against like the energy consumption of a country, and they're like, can you believe this network uses the amount of energy of this smaller country over here, without actually doing an accounting of the energy of the financial system, the existing financial system, or the postal system. As you said, you're writing a letter on paper that came from a tree. It's going and being delivered on a vehicle. There's all these handoffs,
Right.
part of this process. And nobody sort of steps back and says, well, what's the global energy consumption of YouTube or Twitter or the internet or the iPhone? And so we readily make these sort of trade-offs and like accept that the iPhone is positive for progress. Yes, it does have a footprint. The lithium batteries, or the batteries, have a cost. There's a mining. Those come from the earth. And we're making all these trade-offs, but somehow Bitcoin is sort of held to this unfair standard and put up against something out of context without truly understanding like the positives of it. And you're saying, oh, this is not good. It uses too much energy. I mean, what is the value of trustless transactions occurring around, permissionless and trustless transactions happening around the world? Incredible value there. The ability to store value and all of that stuff is sort of completely discounted, pulled off the table. And it's like, in isolation, let's look at the energy consumption as they're writing and sort of on Twitter, using the internet and not questioning any usage of any other technology. But you see this a lot with new technology. Like, it's always held to an unfair standard. And so like one Tesla will catch fire on the freeway, and it's like front page Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, 100 GM vehicles like caught fire and had things happen or recalls that same day. But because it's been around for many decades, or Ford's been around since the 20s, it's just not newsworthy. But these make good headlines, and when people are sort of searching for something to take issue with, Bitcoin tends to come front and center, and it's all taken sort of out of context.
And I try to tell folks, because you're of course we agree. I'm just the choir right now. We're about to do some hymnals, but it literally, I say, be skeptical of everything, including that dollar, that piece of paper, or that plastic with that like strip on the back from the cassette deck era. Like, be skeptical of everything. If you're gonna be skeptical of Bitcoin, let's go ahead and just question everybody, but don't just question one thing and take the other one as gospel. That don't, like, let's have the conversation humbly. I just had to add a little something on top. Now the other thing, and I'm sure the folks that are gonna watch, they know, you guys took one heck of a lead in this EFT, that space, dealing with regulations. I remember New York had the bit license, like all these hoops and loops of getting, it's a fragmented system. We were doing remittances in Zimbabwe, one country, one rule. United States is really more than 50. I knew some politician who couldn't tell us how many states we have, but there's definitely many jurisdictions in addition to the 50 in order to kind of navigate all those issues that relate to being able to send and FinCEN and all these other regulatory bodies. I think, again, and we don't say thank you enough for what you guys have done in that particular area. So thank you. We're saying thank you here.
You're welcome.
No,
Appreciate
humbly. And you got the bloody but about. I think I remember having that poem, the arena and the gladiator. And
it.
everybody
Yeah.
got something to say, but the arena is the arena. Now that with all the, we're starting to see some gradual changes, and I think we all get. Let's tell us what the rules are. We do want to know the rules, but I think there was a time when many folks in the community would say, "Hey, you guys were too conservative. You guys were taking this button-up approach, making sure." And some of those folks aren't even around. Some of them were probably doing some pyramid, a whole bunch of stuff. You guys have been able to make it from being classified in that way to literally being an example in many regards. I mean, it's a spectrum, fine.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about, are the banks ultimately going to take this over? I think there was a time like 2016. I thought we were going to replace, like literally, what we were doing with Bitmari, we were trying to replace Western Union. But what I'm seeing now with the regulatory, I'm in DC, literally in the regulatory bodies, even some of the legislation, if you were trying to just be in compliance, the amount of capital that you would have to have just to meet the regs seemed like it advantages the establishment. And some of the folks are out here, we're just tinkering on the edges trying to, make this work. Of course we could talk about sandboxes and things like that. How do you see, will we be able to keep the entrepreneurial spirit, the self-sovereignty, the things that so brought us to this space, again, in a way that should be regulated, fine. Do you see, where do you see this going? Are they going to eat our lunch? Like, what was that thing that first they ignore you, then they think you're, I think the
then
part
they
we
laugh
forgot,
at you, then they fight you, then you win.
they say then you win. But I think they're gonna buy us all up. Now, talk to me. I'm not trying to do the fear thing, but or uncertainty thing. But how do you see this, progressing? Because you've seen it from that space, like where you guys have followed these dots and lived the dots and pushed the dots.
Yeah, so I think that usually the most vibrant markets tend to have thoughtful regulation. There's some, there's thoughtful rules in place, consumer protection. And I think that there's always like this strong partnership between the private sector and regulators. And I think crypto, will be very similar in the sense that thoughtful regulation is helpful. I think it's good for everyone because it sort of tells you where the rules are in the guideposts. It's hard to build in a gray area without certainty. It's hard to get at banking relationships because banks don't want to bank companies that they're not sure of. I think the cannabis industry, is facing all of these problems, right? It's super hard to get a banking relationship, and yet in some of the states it's legalized, but on the federal level it's still like a tier 1 substance. And so it creates this really distortion where you can't, it's like legalized, everybody's innovating and using, and there's tons of the demand and customers, and you can't get a bank and you're just operating in cash. It's like going back 100 years. So hopefully those things get worked out. But I think ultimately, the challenge with this is that we're dealing with value. So you don't necessarily want startups coming out of like dorm rooms and garages. At the same time, you don't want the barrier to be so high that only people with enough capital to have to fill the regulatory capital requirements and get the licensing and do that work can compete and enter the space. I think that's one of the cool things about DeFi is it's sort of reducing a lot of these barriers, and you're seeing these projects spring up. And it's a couple of, I think some like Aave, that project is kids that just graduated college in Norway, and they're building this massive, cool protocol. So I think that you mentioned sandboxes and creating like innovation friendly zones and ways to get more people involved and like lightweight tiering it, not like one size fits all regulation. Gemini, our first license was a New York trust company license, very heavyweight. We were like a 15-person startup when we got our license. It took us 18 months, and we had to really grow into that type of regulation and that heavyweight nature. But we could sort of take on that challenge, but we just want to make sure that people can build in the space, but in a safe way. I think the U.S. we're working our way towards it, but it is taking a lot of time, and some of the sort of regulation is done through enforcement, which is great because it takes in some ways when you take out like the clear obvious frauds. But I think you also want to couple that with like rulemaking and creating paths for people like that are straightforward so they can come and get licensed and it fits the size and nature of the business and what they're trying to do. I wouldn't recommend a New York trust company for a lot of startups. It's just
Right.
it's a huge
Right.
undertaking.
Man, that thing, bro, look at that's a lunch eater. And you're literally just trying, like
Yeah.
you said, getting jabs. Like even with Ethereum, finding somebody who knows Solidity, like that. Even when I see all the
Yeah.
projects out there, I'm like, it's somebody who's like in the space. My full time, our lead developer is in town for the conference, but he's based in Nairobi. So praise God, or we would, we wouldn't be able to scale as well because we would the cost. So when you talk about you need somebody to have a specific, expertise in a particular field plus no Solidity, I'm like, yo, we just cut all the world out. Like this is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you're saying in the us needing to create an environment where we still can keep that energy. I guess the question, and even when you brought the banks, I still remember like we changed our company from BitMari, BIT, Mari means money in Shona, BitMari to Bill
Mm-hmm.
Mari. Because bro, we were tired of getting hit in the head and the neck and the face. Every time you say bit to somebody, they say no thank you. I'm talking the
Yeah,
banks.
yeah.
And I don't know if you remember R3. Remember they came together, it was a consortium of
Yep.
banks. Man, look, I said, all them custodians, just give us a bank account. Like, look, all that y'all trying to
Yeah.
figure out, just allow us, and you might have some extra rules, but if you got coin, bit, like all that crypt, you couldn't open
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And then when you finally
Yep.
did, you had to open about a few. And our law firm that actually incorporated was Perkins Coie. So we literally we tried to leverage some like good names in the space just so when somebody asked about our documents, get all side eyes. And I think so many folks that are super smart, like you're talking about Norway, like coming up with real innovation, and you see it in the defense. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession, so I worked at McDonnell Douglas and in different aerospace companies, and literally the government was helpful. Like, so, again, we don't talk about, Ma Bell and Bell Laboratories. There was these quasi, government that
Mm-hmm.
got some money. They didn't have to really compete, and they had a monopoly, but they really took that money and actually helped us do breakthrough thing. And I think one of the issues is it's hard with regulatory, like when it's fintech, when the regulations are there, it's hard to get some of those crazy ideas. Just like when I started seeing more defense spending, you know, aerospace planes that fly all over. When you got folks just trying to make a bomb, it's kind of different. They're not, look, I don't need all that. I need a bomb. We're not trying to get
Mm-hmm.
too outlandish with our, engineering. It has to meet this budget. We got a 4-year contract. Let's cut the deal. How do we keep that? And I think you mentioned it too with the support y'all are giving to core developers. But in this space that where we do see some very innovative people, but because there's a regulatory, where do you see the balance, or do you think that's even possible now? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned about like the incumbent banks sort of eating the lunch of crypto companies. I think that the culture of innovation, like it just tends to not exist at those larger institutions. They're franchises, and it's all about playing defense and protecting what you have. There's always been like every bull run, banks like, oh, we have a working group, digital asset or blockchain working group. They stand up 10, 20 people. They write some analyst paper, but it sort of, okay, what actually becomes of it? And I don't think the banks are truly invested or bought in. They're sort of doing it. They have one foot in, one foot out. But I think ultimately they don't have cultures of innovation at this point. They're just so large and they're too big to fail. They're heavily regulated. And so, I think banks will potentially buy different startups in the space, maybe, and try and buy innovation. That's usually what you do if you can't actually innovate. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we have, a number of crypto founders that cash out, have good outcomes for them and their teams, and then go on to build those next things. But I think that generally speaking, there's just too much inertia, too much bureaucracy, and it becomes the innovator's dilemma. So that's not really what we worry about a whole lot. I worry much more about just getting banking relationships. As you said, when you have Bit or Coin or anything crypto in your name, you're guilty. And they're like, no, now what's the question? And I mean, even we're 8 years into this journey and there's still tons of resistance and tons of banks.
Come on, ain't nobody resisting y'all. Come on, Cameron. Who tells you that, bro? Come on, I'm telling you. I want to know. I'm listening.
I don't know if I can give you names, but there's definitely banks that are still kind of resistant or don't want to underwrite the risk, and are hesitant, and there's sort of second or third followers. They wait for someone to jump, a couple people to jump off the diving board first. That being said, JP Morgan banks us, and it took us about 2 years to get through that underwriting process. And I think we landed them as a bank 2 years ago, which is a big win, but it takes a long time. And they took a bit of a risk in their, from their perspective. But there's plenty of high street banks in the UK that won't go near it. So we're definitely, we made a ton of progress, but there's a lot more to be made. And I totally understand what you're saying about having Bit or anything in your name or business plan that is related to crypto.
Right. And it all seemed like PR stunts now. I mean, if you were in the space, they were, we're going to have this incubator, accelerator. Y'all won't even let me open an account. You're going to talk about the accelerator. Yeah. Come on, get out of here with that. Well, humbly. So thank you for knocking down it. You get Jamie Dimon, you get some of those big folks that do the right thing by us. And I think, again, that's one of the things we don't appreciate, we don't say enough, because of some of the early success, not because you guys weren't shooting in the gym, y'all was doing the work. It does make it better for a lot of us in our position. So definitely a thank you again on that. What do you see now? Some of the things that are more topical, folks are talking about the merge. What are you, again, I'm coming from a space where I've been hearing these Ethereum folks, and I'm not classic, or I'm not going to even go into it, but literally, we've been talking about proof of work to proof of stake forever. And forever in our space is probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. What are your thoughts? I know it's going to happen. If I'm skeptical of that, you're going to really say, look, I got on here. Sinclair is definitely a cuckoo bird. Of course it's going to happen. It's happening. Okay, fine.
I think it's going to happen, but I'm not that close to it. So for all I know, it gets pushed out in the future a little bit, but it does feel like this time it's pretty concrete. And I guess it'll be the largest shift from a proof of work to a proof of stake. I mean, the amount of value sort of in Ethereum, that'll be a pretty big event. And it's probably the right thing for Ethereum. It sounds like it's going to increase the throughput and scalability quite a bit. And there are other sort of chains in that space, like your Solanas that started proof of stake, like your Tezos that started there. I don't think anybody's started proof of work at that scale and size and shifted over. I think it's going to be a strong short-term catalyst for both Ethereum and the space as a whole. Because I think it's always positive when there's like those big breakthroughs or shifts, and this would be one of them. So I think it's good for Ethereum. I think it's good for the entire space. But it's probably like a short term, and I think the question will be like, and then what's next? I mean, sort of zooming out, we have a pretty complicated global backdrop. You know, we're maybe in a quote recession, depending on who you talk to. But there's, you know, inflation is still like the Fed has to get a handle on that. It sounds like they're still pursuing aggressive interest rate hikes. And then you've got the whole war in Ukraine, oil, the winter coming up. And so that's when the demand's going to really increase, and you know, for oil and heating and things like that in Europe. So there's a lot of wild cards and backdrop going on. So it's hard to know. I mean, does are we at the bottom? Does it chop sideways for the next 6 to 12 months, or do people sort of look past it all and say, well, okay, I've, you know, we're now 3 or 4 months into the invasion in Ukraine. I'm sort of gotten comfortable with the fact that that's happening, and it's just a thing. It's a risk that I now better understand where it's headed. And I've priced in inflation and these different things, and they just sort of run over it and look more towards the positive side. There's sort of the upsides of crypto now that people aren't sort of running around with their hair on fire after that big sell-off, right? We had Luna and a couple like massive deleveragings, and then it sort of takes that out of the system. And are people now willing to sort of start looking on kind of that upside again?
But you kind of you pulled in you took the Ethereum conversation to a few places. Now I told you this before. There was a tweet that you did that was, and I was literally, like I said, in Poland, in Lublin. Lublin is like the closest major city to the Ukrainian border, and we had students from Cameroon, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, which we were trying to leave, and we we're helping them out. And I saw, I think it's March 15th, yeah, March 15th, 2002. So that invasion was like on and popping about that time. And you said Bitcoin is a monetary system that requires no violence to work. Mm-hmm. Now, you know how like when folks listen to certain scriptures, certain words, certain things, they come up with their own things. Now, I can talk to you, so I don't have to think about this in some type of like somebody said this 100 years ago. Cameron did this like this year. What were you saying? Break it down, please. Make it plain. Or were you just, or were you just waiting for somebody? You just, I might have. Like, I took it like, man, this is like we even like the whole conference. Like we're talking about violence and peaceful solutions because of that tweet. So I hope it doesn't grow another life. But I would love to like have you say when you put that out there in this incredible universe, the Twitterverse.
What were you? Yeah, it was cool. It was cool because it like I think you DM'd me and maybe even left like a voicemail. Like it really struck a chord with you. I was like, all right. Yeah. Every once in a while, you send out like an idea into Twitter, and you're like, I don't know if anybody will even read this. And then every once in a while, like things light up, and it's kind of fun when that happens and you really strike a chord. But if you sort of strip it down, we use US dollars, because we have to. Merchants in this country have to accept dollars. We have to pay our taxes in dollars. If you don't, you go to jail. It's illegal. And so on that level, like fiat currency is coercive. And it's ultimately people use it because they have no choice. And like violence is sort of at that endpoint, right? You will go to jail if you don't use this thing. Bitcoin has none of those coercive elements to it. The people who use it or hodl it and buy it do it out of their own volition because they want to voluntarily. And so it's actually purely organic on that level. There's no enforcing you to use it. And if you the settlement layer of Bitcoin is also the transactions happen and they settle without violence. There's no military needed to enforce that. Now, ultimately, like if you get defrauded or someone tries to steal your Bitcoin, you will, practically speaking, go to the court system and rely on that system. But that system, the settlement layer of that system is violence. Whether it's marshals showing up and confiscating or saying, hey, you know, we're holding you in contempt, or you broke your contract. Ultimately, that is backed by the might and, you know, of the violence of armies and or law enforcement. And Bitcoin doesn't require that on the settlement layer, and there's nothing forcing people to use it, which makes where it is today that much more remarkable, because it's just purely an individual's choice. And I think that's sometimes missed by people when they're looking at crypto and fiat. And show me something that's created trillions of dollars of demand in like a less, you know, in a decade, that's just purely like opt-in. And that's a remarkable thing. And when you look at those different fact patterns, you realize like this is inevitable. It's an inevitability. It's going to happen. It's happening. We might be in like the trough of a wave, you know, at sort of in the winter or low point, but actually like just directionally, this has been like an incredible decade. And it's just so pure and so organic and just purely demand driven, which I think is incredible.
Hallelujah. Amen. I'm not going to, we got some folks with different sensibilities, so I'm not going to, my mom might be watching, she's a good Baptist woman, but what you just laid down, brother, that was like old covenant, new covenant, like that. And I'm not using, let me say, and we could even say that there's no marketing machine out there, you know, buying ad space for it. Like it literally, when you said it, one of the problems with even educating, just again, just taking what you said, I'm just trying to do a little jazz on top of what you said, a little riff, if you will. Too often, I now see people educating folks not into what you said, like getting down to, you know, first principle type, you know, I'm not trying to use cliche terms, but they're more trying to figure out, especially when we're talking about the Black community. And this is in general, but particularly where Black folks oftentimes we over index into some of these particular platforms or industries. It's more of a consumerism. It's just digital. Like, okay, we're gonna get you here. We got a hustle over here. And now we got a multi-level scheme over here. We're gonna do another multi-level, but now it's digital. And we're gonna throw the word blockchain in or crypto in it. And people are being taught how to use things without really understanding some of these fundamentals. And I think that even the way you just really said it, I pray that you, especially in times of violence. Like right now, we're living in violence in a way that's we've so normalized it. We like there's literally wars, like not just in Europe, like wars are going on, like literally, and we literally go about our everyday. I mean, I'm in DC. There's violence at scales that are very like alarming. Like you can't call it anything else. It's alarming, and we don't speak to what and how what we're doing impacts or shows an alternative to consensus building without beating me in the head, bringing together folks from different walks of life with a common interest. You know what I'm saying? Even with our Black Blockchain Summit, we say Black communities because it's like 1.5 billion people of African descent. Now, it's about 600 to 800 million of y'all, Cameron. I'm just, you know, European descent. Y'all did come over here and you got Australia now, but that's about 600 to 800 million. There's about 1.5 billion Black folks that look like me with a nappy chip strap, like literally. And we're different communities, but being able to come together with all our tribes with this thing called Bitcoin, with this promise. And like, I just think when you break it down, what you're saying about the violence part, I just, you know, it makes me more, you know, even proud. Like this is what this is why we have these conversations. We
Hmm.
don't need just philosophers. We are real, people in a real space. And the fact that we're working in something that didn't and doesn't require violence, I just think it's super compelling. And I know you don't have, I've used up a lot of the time, and it was y'all got some things coming up. That thing with the violence, you broke it down even more. So we're gonna make that like a special clip or something. What can
Cool.
we see in the future? We got the credit card. We're going to get mass adoption. The next billion people, definitely credit card use is real. What else are you guys, doing, and what do you see Gemini in the future, and how it's going to impact us?
Yeah, so I think the credit card's a big product for us, and I think a great way, we hope, the form factor of like onboarding that next 100 million people, because we're saying don't change your behavior. People know what credit cards are; they're familiar with that piece of technology for, I think, going on 60 years now. We're just changing like the reward and what you get, and we're also creating a cool like experience. I think it's a better credit card banking experience with that. So that's one of the biggest things. Nifty Gateway has launched publishers tool, so service publishing of NFTs and drops. It's starting with a couple hundred publishers and creators right now, but we're hoping to expand that out to thousands. Where I think one of the hard things about NFTs is like it's to collect it, you kind of know where to go. You go to your Nifty Gateway or other marketplaces, but how do you create an NFT if you're a creative and you don't understand blockchain or the different smart contract languages? We're trying to make NFTs simple so that anybody can go and just mint their NFTs and create that piece of art or part of a community or what have you. So those are two big things on the horizon. And I just want to circle back to like what you were saying about Bitcoin and like education first principles, is that I think that it provides a really interesting way like to short your government. If you don't like what your government is doing, by holding dollars, you're actually like funding the government. You're giving them credit and allowing them, that's it's almost like an investment. But if you say, hey, I'm going to take my dollars and put in Bitcoin because I don't really like what you're doing, it's an interesting protest, if you will. And it's also like there's a really big wealth transfer going on right now. The people who are getting the crypto and sort of see this as this new future, the early adopters get rewarded for taking that risk. And there's all these boomers who are out there saying, no, like crypto's not going to work. And they're skeptical. And that's fine because they understand their world, the banking system, and all the power structures that they grew up with. But those are being dismantled. And I think there's like there will be this like big inflection point. And we see like these young crypto whales who have, built like fortunes in the blockchain, and that will happen more and more. So I think like it's easy to get like caught up in price and like the FOMO and the YOLO and all the meme stock, that whole sentiment. But I think like you said it well, like we really need to continue to educate on a first principles basis, like zooming out, what does the next 20, 25 years look like? And what does that mean? And then I think once people see that, they're like, oh, wait a second, I got to get on this. This is like Noah's Ark. There's all this inflation. There's all these problems over here. I need to get on this thing, this movement, because that's the future. And I think that like I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. Like in the next 5 or 10 years, the majority of the workforce will be millennials. So the boomers are saying all these things, throwing out FUD, trying to sort of overregulate in some cases, and throw cold water on Bitcoin and crypto. But it's actually like in a couple of years, it's all it's going to be kind of moot because the workforce will be predominantly millennials, and the money that they want and the future that they want to live in is one of crypto.
Now look, we gonna drop the mic on that,
Maybe there's
man.